I give up. And I know I'm, therefore, a massive failure. To me, after 42 years of doing such things, I know that I have not been able to, with those inspired, isolated examples that I created, bring that change among people. My whole idea was that if I create one such model, there'll be people who will want to emulate that. Did not happen. You know, when I go to colleges and I'm listening to people who are 20, 18, 21, and they tell me that they want to join conglomerates and multinational corporations, I don't know what to do with them. None of them are vested with the significance of some value that they can bring to India. How do you enlarge the footprint, green footprint of India? How do you go back and learn from our fathers, of people like Gandhi to Kumarappa, to many others who have done such sterling work in this country?
So my guest today is Dr. Hariharan Chandrashekar, whose fundamental areas of work are in urban sustainability initiatives and ecosystem protection initiatives. Dr. Chandrashekar, thank you so much for being on Let's Talk Water.
Hi, Nolan. Thanks for having me. You're a wonderful guy, and all my chats so far have been very enthused.
Thank you. I was actually going through your Wikipedia page and was fascinated with the amount of work that you have done over the past, since the 80s, if I'm right?
40 years.
40 years. Fabulous, especially when it comes to water and energy. But from an economist to water and energy, how did that transition actually take place?
Well, that's a story that will take me back to the 70s when I was weaned on people like Louis Fisher, Pyarelal, many others like that who wrote on Gandhi. It was not what Gandhi himself wrote, though Young India was one wonderful publication, and a lot of it is available, every bit of it is available, was available in print in those years. I don't know what it was between, I would reckon, about 1973 and 1980 of this kind of reading that set a very fundamental set of visions in my head. Right? So my influence was of those years and of what Gandhi wrote and what people wrote about Gandhi and his work. And then at some point in time, I stumbled upon J.C. Kumarappa's work on the Kheda development model. Remember that I was a chartered accountant in the late 70s. Then I walked into journalism and spent the next 5-6 years. By 1984 or 85, I meet one wonderful lady at Taj Land's End in Bandra in Bombay. And 3 months later, she sends me one of those Par Avion envelopes, those blue envelopes we used to get in my days. That's right. And she sends me recommendation, very strong recommendation to 3 universities. And the one that gave me a full waiver was, the one in Harrisburg in Penn State. I went there and I chose to first do something about corporate communications. But I walked in one day to the School of Business and Economics, it was called, very small one small building, modest one. I met the head of department, a Filipino, and I don't know what it was that he said. I decided I will switch directions in the first quarter, and I took to a model which simulates, these are econometric models. He had talked to me about another economist of the Stalin Purge era, 1937 and before, of this man called Kondratieff. And the Kondratieff curve was very interesting to me in ways that I could extrapolate an economy's directions for the next, say, 30 years. He was a 30-year wave theory man. So I chose to do a dissertation from 1860, when we have recorded kind of data in India, to 1980, and then on to 2010. And at that point of time, we were an economy of $180 billion. Today we are at $3,800 billion, right? And for me, what was important was to look at an economy which was very agrarian, very low on, shall we say, abuse of resources. It was also to do with how we had to grow this economy. I'm talking of mid-1980s now, okay. 20 years after the Green Revolution of 1967, and you know what happened after that with the abuse of soils. Silent Spring and Rachel Carson wrote and warned the world of how we should not abuse our soils. We did exactly that from 1967 to, I would say, about 1980 plus. I was telling myself, if there is an agrarian economy, which can then, keep our rural populace where they are and not let our urban, part of India to grow as much, we would then have a more sane economy. Remember, China and India were at about the same GDP at that point in time. That is what, in a sense, led me to think that economy and ecology are connected. You take all our settlements. Nobody will want to go, even if I went 1,000 years behind, they would only settle in places where they could make a living. And water was essential for it. Every city, anywhere in the world, any settlement, small or big, always has to revolve around water first. And then would come the rest of the things. And that was very fascinating for me. Kumarappa also wrote about that. And between my return, 24, 25, maybe 27 months after, in 1987, late 1987, I began to see that, if I went back to our village India and explored what livelihoods came from, I could see that it was all about water. I spent time in 13 districts between Visakhapatnam and Gadamalapuram to some 3-4 districts of Gujarat, which were all, low on water. Then I went to Siriganganagar in Rajasthan. Eventually, there was one water project, I think it was in 92 or something, which came our way. No more than 20,000 rupees. A lot of money in those days. And so we chose to work on one watershed with the district watershed directorate of Dehradun. Sridhar was one of those wonderful guys who had been working on these same things from about 1980 or 81. He had started his journey with something called the Development Alternatives, which is still around. Ashok Khosla runs it and he's still alive. But Sridhar was disenchanted with some of the directions that DA was taking and he moved on. And by 10 years later in 92, he and I founded what was called the Academy of Environics as a trust.
Okay.
So see, this journey is about economy. It's about ecology. They are both inextricably intermeshed. You can't do one without the other.
So, Doctor, when you're talking about water, before the recording, we were discussing this. Why is water very important when we talk about sustainability, and especially for you?
Well, it's not about me. It's about, India is still at about 600,000 villages. And if you Google, you'll find that we are still the largest number of villages. South America has got no more than about 100,000 plus villages. China has got about the same as we have got even today, despite the fact that they have grown 6 times. They are at $20 trillion today, China's. And, of course, the rest of it, Europe, US and Australia, don't have any villages. India's heart lies in its villages, as Gandhiji said then, and I don't think it has changed much, if only we know how to steer those economic directions in a way that we stay with our villages and their livelihoods. And that means water. Without water, I don't have cultivation. For example, if I were to take, like I told you, I think a couple of days ago, if I were to take this entire country and put a wall of 1 meter, right, and held all the rainwater, we will have way more than we need. And I said this, people like, Nithya Jacob said this in 1995. I have known this from about 1987, 88. All we need to do is to see that this water, today we use 80% of all the annual renewable water that India secures for cultivation water. We use only 7.5 to 8% for all the needs of, urban people like you and I. And the rest of it, about 12% or so, goes for industrial water. And what are we dealing with in most of the, jargon and language and development lexicon that we speak of? We are only talking of this 20% of the water, and no one wants to work on the other cultivation water component of 80%. I am still saying, therefore, everything revolves around water. And water is not about water. Water is about energy. You take any city, you pick the city. And I will tell you that the city's energy, not at individual levels, but at the level of the city, you will find that over 50% of the energy that the city demands every day is for merely transportation of water and pumping of water. There are many more bleak stories of groundwater and extraction pumps and energy, therefore, and of the depletion of our shallow aquifers. If I were, right here, north of Bangalore, even if I were to go, say, some 4 or 5 kilometers, even less, 2 to 3 kilometers from here, and I dug down to 1,500 feet, I'm touching water which is 10,000 years old. I'm taking water which is 10,000 years old at these deep aquifers of 1,600, 1,800 feet. How is it going to last? What are we going to do about this? How are we going to ban and stop all use of deep aquifers that does not belong to any living species? The human is the most destructive and devastating of all of them. What belongs to us in the earth is only this 20 meters or so of shallow aquifers, like your grandfather did, my grandfather did. We use the water that is at the open wells, at the dug wells, and not this scourge of bore wells that hit us, I would say, about 1983 or so.
Doctor, it's very interesting because most of the experts I've spoken to have very clearly stated that we must go away, move from using fossil water, borewell water,
Absolutely.
and start going towards rainwater harvesting and open wells. Revive the concept of open wells. I was speaking to Mr. Ajay Singh, I'm speaking to Ganesh, and they were talking and we were discussing about open wells. I was telling them that in most of the places that I've traveled, especially villages today, there are open wells, but they're not being used because water is being provided to their doorstep. So they don't want to use the open wells. So the open wells are just being left to, basically the water's there. It's used as a dump yard. They throw garbage into it. So that the concept of open wells is slowly being lost.
True that. Nolan, I'll put it like this to you. Somewhere in a country that has revered water, there are people, many villages that I've seen around Dehradun and parts like that, who will remove their chappals before drinking water by their hand. They will not drink it by the cup. For them, water is something that they revere. And this is 700 million to 800 million of us.
They still do that today?
They continue to do that. In fact, one of the members of the Wow Action Forum, a man called Shobit, comes from Dehradun. He told us this story recently of how this culture has remained even in his generation. And this boy is no more than 28 or 30. So I'm saying to you, look who asked anybody to go to the Kumbh Mela? They went on their own. Who advertised about the Kumbh Mela? Nobody did. And you had 20 million people thronging this place, right? So there is something that India has among those muted millions that Nehru wrote about in his Discovery of India. You must read the first chapter, the introductory. He writes about these muted millions. And these are, even today, the life of India. And what is this 80, or I would say 90, 10% syndrome? 10% of us who live in the cities, the percentage of people living in cities is different. But this 10%, in a sense of the population, destroy about 80 to 90% of our natural resources. This is a country where we have only 200,000 square kilometers of all our cities. If you look at the 2011 census, we didn't have a 2021 census. You will see that we are 7,900 towns, cities, agglomerations. 7,900. And today, this population of about 40%, I would reckon, live in 2% of India's landmass, which is 200,000 square kilometers. India has 3.3 million square kilometers, of which about 1.5 million, one half is declared agricultural, right? What are we doing? Why are we hurtling toward this urbanization in India? Why are we not returning opportunity to the hinterland? Why are we not encouraging people to see that they have economic and ecological opportunity right there where they live? Why are we having this kind of miserable migration? And we saw the sad and sorrow impact of that post-COVID at the time of the outbreak. Now, this can easily be done, but it requires political courage. It needs determination from economists first. If you go back to the last, say, 1930s onward, about 100 years, the Keynesian theory was about the demand-side economy. From about what we call the neoliberal economics of, say, 1969-17, it's not attributed to any one single individual.
Okay.
And that is about supply side. Reagan was about supply side. Every single political leader chose, because it was expedient and convenient, to go with supply side, which meant massive, brutal abuse of natural resources and of public expenditure. How do we stop this? How do we reverse this whole process if we need to live? And the humans as a species, We are among 84, 84 lakh, they say, 8.4 million species, right? You read the Hanuman, the chant, and you'll find that we are talking about 84 lakh. Many, just now, maybe 50 years ago, scientists discovered that was about 8.4 million species. And the numbers, any scientist will tell you, biological scientist will tell you that this number is far more, because we have not mapped anything now on aquatic species and many other species. It's a complex world.
Doctor, since water is the essence of life and civilizations have basically died or been destroyed because there's no water, people don't really understand that this city is also running on, extended borrowed time, if one could actually call it that way, because many of the experts that I've spoken over the past month or so, and they tell me that we have enough and sufficient water, but we're really not doing anything about it. And you have started something known as Rain Reach, and you're trying to catch students, because sometimes I believe there's no use talking to people in their 50s and 60s. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle anyone, but the point is when you catch them young, makes sense. So what is Rain Reach all about?
When I started, I think it's been on my mind for the last 10 years, right, from about 2015 or so. And even in years before, maybe in the first decade of the century, every time I spoke to kids, I found that they were way more positive and willing to believe. Like you said, anyone over 25 is, dead in terms of their willingness or ability to change. So it was in 2023, I think, or 2022, just, between the COVID outbreaks and such, that I met the headmistress of a school here, somewhere close to in North Bangalore. It happened by chance. And as I listened to her, and she said, at one point she said, well, sir, tell me why we should not drink borewell water. It has minerals, it is rich, and it is healthy. I didn't know how to respond to her. And I told myself, if there is a headmistress, an HM who can say this, what about the other teachers? And what about the children? The other thing I realized in maybe the next fortnight or so was that every BBMP school, for some reason, does not have Kaveri water. It has only a borewell, and typically it will have been some MLA in the local area or whoever has funded that. You go to any BBMP school, they're constantly strapped for funds. A borewell repair has got to be fixed. Some light system has gone, an RO water system has packed up, and they need some money to fix that. And in every school, in many of the schools, I found that they had a minimum of an acre. And that's 4 million liters for me. The moment I see an acre at 1000 mm of rainfall that Bangalore gets, it's that much. And most of these schools have got about 500 kids. There are a few, of course, which have about 1,000. But the average is about 500. And if I were to take only 20 liters to a kid in a day, and that's very generous, as a matter of fact, it'll be about 15 or so. At 500 students and teachers, typically you will have about 15, 20 as faculty. I found that this is about 10,000 liters per day. If I have 10,000 liters, I need only about 3.5 million liters in a year. And then I break this into 3 seasons. Of course, the monsoon season of about 8 months. And Bangalore is very fortunate that we receive rains, the same amount of rain, 1000 mm. In Surat falls in 4 months. In Chennai falls in about 4 months. In our case, it falls in about 7 months or 2 months. Right? From April. Our summer lasts only about 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Have you noticed? So I said to myself, if I got 4 million liters there on 1 acre, and in many cases I found that they had 2 acres on that. And if I worked a few demand side things, have you noticed in any school, you open the tap, it's flowing out like the Ganga, 20 liters, 25 liters per minute. Because, those are all old faucets, they're plastic faucets. They don't want to put anything expensive because it gets stolen most often. So I figured out if I worked on, let us say, the water efficient fixtures there and dropped it to say 5 liters per minute, like you have in the airport today. In the airport today, you have got it at 2 liters and less per minute.
And no one complains.
You must go and see one of these washrooms.
No, nobody complains.
Nobody complains, of course. You and I are the users and we are the abusers, if you ask me. And yet we don't complain when we walk into the washroom at the airport. Why? You go to any of these five-star hotels because of regulation and such, and use the faucet there in the washroom, and you'll find that you will not have anything over 5 liters per minute. Why are we not accepting that?
Have aerators fixed.
Exactly, right? And in many other cases, we resist the idea of having aerators. Why is that? And how do we change that habit? It was one part of the story. But for kids, they will accept it, right? You give water in a way that those faucets are working well, they will accept. So I said, we'll work on that first. Then I said, we'll put a digital meter to make them understand how much they are using of water in a day, and therefore in a month, in a year. The teachers accepted this idea. Typically, in any of these BBFB schools, I find the PE teacher, the physical education teacher, and the science teacher are the ones who will want to work with us. Of course, the HM will give the blessings, let us say, to the work that we want to do. The next I found for myself that if I'm using the toilets, there's about 10 liters of water that goes down per kid per day. And that on this 20 is 50%. So I said, if out of this total of something like, let's say, 3.6 million liters, this 50% of the water, if I'm able to treat it with some very, very simple, without energy kind of systems, they're called constructed wetlands. There are many such systems. And I'm able to put that pipe back in to the toilet in a way that we can use that for flush and such. I have saved 1/2 of the demand. The aerators will fix another, say, 15 to 20% of that. I have only 30% more water to be fixed. And then I looked at, you see, in any of these schools, you will find about 10,000 square feet easily in any of the BBFB schools as rooftops. Every 1,000 square feet is 100,000 liters or 1 lakh liters.
Every 1,000?
Every 1,000 square feet of a rooftop is 1 lakh liters that I can harvest in the rain months of, say, May to November.
Okay.
That 1 lakh liter into 10,000 square feet, therefore into 10, is 1 million liters, right?
And their annual requirement is?
Is 3.6. Now, 1/2 of it, I treat the wastewater and give it back.
That's done.
I drop these with the aerators.
Yes.
On the supply side, I bring this in of 1 million liters. And what is left, therefore, that I have to handle? It is not even 10% that I have to give them as water, and which I will take from the borewell in those months when we don't have rains.
Okay.
So in every one of these schools, the team at the AltTech Foundation under the Rain Reach program, they worked out a simple, rainfall pattern. Rain months, winter months, because evaporation is lower, and the summer months. Okay. And what do you find? About 200 days, 7 months, 200 days will be when you've got rains. So I have to beat the other 160 days. Now, also remember, about 60 days of this are in the academic year, are times when you don't have the school running. Right? In the summer, for instance, just now, after the exams, for a month and a half to something else, we don't have. Yeah. So I discount for that. I'm able to meet it and make the school net zero water. The trick is to see that I'm able to meet their water requirement in the non-rain months. The cost of doing storage is very high. For every liter, it costs me about 14 rupees. Let's say, for instance, you want to set up a storage tank of 10,000 liters. Into 14 is your cost. 14 rupees per liter.
Okay.
So we have to avoid storage. If you go back to, let us say, Krishna Deva Raya, you go back to the kings of, those kings of Saurashtra. Saurashtra, 100 kingdoms, right, of West Gujarat. You will find that the only thing that they did is storage. And their storage was an amazing multiple. In Bangalore, for example, today, the Water Supply Board offers you about 145 to 150 crore liters. After losses on unaccounted for water and such, we get about 100 crore liters. But our demand is 250 crore liters. Right? Which means only 40% of the water is from Kaveri or whatever the Water Supply Board offers you. The rest, 60% of the water, which is 150 crore liters, at the total of 250 crore liters, is coming from where? From borewells.
Groundwater, yes.
Now, if you ask anybody, or Water Supply Board to any other officer, hey, how much storage do you have in the event of not having water or pumps running? Without pumps, there's no life, in terms of supply water. They'll tell you there is absolutely no storage capacity around Bangalore.
So coming back to rain reach, I mean, this is very interesting what's happening or what happened in Chennai. But in rain reach, I was actually reading you when you're catching these children young, you have two components over there. And I found it very fascinating. And you initially, when I read that, what was this hardware component and what was the software component? I mean, it was interesting. First, I'm like, what are you talking about software and hardware? But then when I actually went through it, there was so much about that.
Right.
What is that actually?
Thank you.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Thanks, Nolan, for bringing me back to the schools. You see, if I want to tell a kid at class 10, 15-year-old, as to the connect of water, that is, I ask a kid, sir, where do you get the water from? He'll say the tanker.
Yeah,
Or he'll say the
either
bore.
the tap or the tank.
So then you ask him, so where did the water come in the borewell? He doesn't know. He'll grin. You ask him, so where did the tanker fellow get the water from for the school? He doesn't know, right? Very few kids will tell you it comes from Kaveri, I mean, you remember you're 13, 14, you're class 8, 9, 10. Now,
But sir, it's not just kids. If you ask people here itself living in Bengaluru, where do you get your water from? It's the water tanker.
right. You know what happened to me when I met these kids? See, more than the teachers, I must have met probably 30, 40 kids in that first, say, 3, 4 weeks of going to maybe 3, 4 schools. Abhigere, this one in Jakkur. Then I went to another one near Eranka, Kempapura school here near Hebal. And I found that all of them had this challenge of not being able to connect what they get as water to where it's coming from. Now, the only way I could change that was to first show them how their own roofs could give them water. They had to understand how wastewater could become usable water and how it is not wastewater but used water, which can therefore be, treated and reused for other purposes. I had to make them understand this. And therefore, we had to put together, I will call it a live lab in the school. And that meant hardware. I have to spend money on the rooftop harvesting pipes and downtakes and the filtration systems, then drawing those plumbing lines back to wherever the storage sump tank was, and so on. I had to make them understand how they could conserve without them actually doing anything about using less of water. And that meant, ensuring that their taps were efficient. I had to make them understand that they have to know how much they are using as water in the school. And that meant measuring water. We put up a rain gauge and we bought a manual rain gauge and not a digital rain gauge because I wanted the kids to go up there every day and log it. In one school, kids go there. This is class monitors from class 9 and 10.
Okay.
2 sections of 4 boys. They will go up there, log that and say, this is how much we got as rain in the rain months. See, typically Bangalore gets about 60 rain days between, say, May and say November or October. So we got them to understand, this is last year and the year before, we got them to understand that they can actually do something about disconnect with water they use and where that water can come from. Now, this software part of it meant that we have to make them learn by doing it, which meant that they have to work with us. In fact, in many schools, when we are doing this rainwater harvest, we choose to make them come and clean. For example, after the summer, there will be a lot of leaf litter in the roofs. And so it was that we realized if they do not work on some of these elements, they do not imbibe and absorb this connect between what they use as water and what is generated as source of water.
So basically, you were giving them practical experience.
Absolutely.
Let them understand.
So, for example, summer, by the end of next month, we would have some of our boys going there. Then we get the kids to come and clean up the roof. The leaf litter has to be taken out. Then we make them understand why we have these litter filters, the leaf litter filters.
Yes, correct. So,
then we ask them to help us, not that they work too much, on the cleaning up of the downtakes, the filtration system, backwashing it, and so on.
oh, they do all this.
Of course, the kids do it.
Wow.
In the sense we do it, but we ask them to also be
But
part.
they're there. Okay.
You see, learning is never by a book. You know this and I know it. We have to, and it's a very organic process of learning. And what I find fascinating about working with kids is, you talked about shaping young minds and so on, or catching them young. You know, what you learn when you're 12, 13 and 14 stays with you for life, right? And you must see some of the videos of these kids. Amazing. Very articulate, very clear on what they are learning from this process. That is reward for me. You know, so we take them through this whole process. So now we have the hard way. Then we get in people. We get many of these water leaders, people who have been part of our forum also. We ask them to go there once a week. Every week in one school or the other, whichever. We will have one session of that kind for about 2 hours, where all the kids, 400, 500 of them are sitting. And this guy is not talking to them. He's conversing with them. He's asking kids to see what they want to say. And I tell each such volunteer, we call them water volunteers or water warriors or whatever. We request them to not go and speak to them. Who are we to think that we know more than the kids? How do I draw things out of these children? That is the idea of these sessions that we have. That is water mentor sessions. Every Friday or Saturday, depending upon the school, we have one session like that. Of course, just now, the exams and such, we have stopped it. And you know who these volunteers are? CEOs of companies. There's one guy who runs some company or the other, stays somewhere in Whitefield or something. He'll come all the way to one of these schools in the north, and it's an hour and a half for him. He enjoys it. You know, there are children, students of architecture, students of urban planning from schools of architecture in this area, who come there. See, they are about 21, 22, right? Obviously much older than these kids, and they can be therefore teachers or mentors for them. And we train, inculcate a few things, induct them, shall we say, with these water mentors, and make them go there and talk and to elicit things from these kids.
So basically, you're not just teaching the students, but you're also teaching these people who are coming over there.
Of course.
So it's
yeah. These kids, for instance, one faculty of a school of architecture said, "Sir, can you give us a certificate of participation?" Of course. Why will I not? And we call them water mentors, and give it to them.
I also want to talk about the net zero solutions, which you're working on.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how you're doing that.
If I had, therefore, think about 5 PMC of water into 28 billion, that is. What should you do for the city? You must first say, every building which has a minimum of, let's say, 2 acres absolutely must harvest in the time in a way that they don't put it down in the ground and recharge it. I've seen many of the speakers who have been on your platform saying that they should put it down in the ground. I say, what on earth are we doing? How do I hold that water from the rooftop, put it into a filtration system, and use that water as drinking water? Why will I want to put it down as recharge systems, which is what the groundwater tribunal is also telling you today? I was speaking to somebody who manages a hospital here in Whitefield this morning, and he's saying, "Sir, I was speaking to our director, and the director says that we must do something about the water." I said, "Look, we can do all of that, and you'll get your money back in 2.5 to 3 years at the max." He didn't believe me. I gave him the numbers again. In this case, for example, I can't take names now. They have 50 acres of land. See the math now. Every year, at 1 meter, I'll get 4 million liters. But let's say conservatively, I get only 3 million liters.
Okay.
Think that. As surface water, which is falling on this land of 50 acres. Now that means that I have got, therefore, 150 million liters of water that is falling on this land and that I can harvest. Right? From the rooftops, from the land. Next, what is the requirement?
So just before you go there, so rooftop, I understand. How do you harvest from the land?
Okay. There is a development here of 27 acres. You must come and see it. For the first time, perhaps in the world, not just this country. I started this maybe 2.5 years ago. I looked at the contour of this land. It's here just off Hosur Road. It's a builder's whatever kind of development, which has 515 homes as villas, not as apartments. 515 villas over 27 acres. Okay. If I were to take the requirement to be 600 liters per home, we have got approximately, therefore, about 300,000 liters. Multiplied for the 360 days of the year, and you'll find it to be 110 million liters. This was my equation.
Okay.
I looked at 27 and I took it at 4 million liters. And I said, if I'm having therefore about 80 plus, about 100 million liters I get, right? I said, no, sir, I won't get this 100 million if I am putting it on the ground. There's runoff that happens. There's water, soil that takes the water. I took this figure at only 25% of that 100 million. Today, this year, last year we harvested 4.8 million liters, 48 lakh liters, because it was the first year we were testing, trialing all sorts of things with the engineers and the project team. This year we are getting up to 25 million liters, if you please.
So this is rooftop?
No rooftop here. This is only surface water, muddy water. For a water professional, we call it turbidity. That is the muddiness in the water is, the count is something called NTU. I won't go into what it is. When it is muddy, the water, and you drive it, let's say, into a pond, and you send it for a lab test, you'll find that the NTU count is about 420 to 430. What we did is we set up some systems where this muddy water that is going into the pond, we created a pond therefore, right, of about 12 lakh liters. Now this water, before it gets into the pond, we did some filtration with 3 different substations like that we set up. It's all basic civil engineering, right? The water which went into the pond had an NTU of 115. Yesterday I'm getting that count and I'll send it to you after this chat. 115 was the count, brought down from 430 or so. Then this water which is in the pond, we drive it with a basic monoblock. We drive it another 400 or 500 meters to a water utility block where I treat it further with some simple systems of ACFs and PSFs and a few other things to a point where it becomes drinking water with less than one as count of NTU. The drinking water that you and I drink has to have less than 1 as NTU. From 450 to 115 to less than 1. It costs us about 50 lakhs plus to do this as water infrastructure.
Rainwater.
I think it costs us 60 to 70 lakhs. 70 lakhs, I would say.
Just rainwater.
This is pure rainwater falling on the ground, not on the rooftop.
Okay.
Not on anything else. Mostly it's falling on earth.
I got it, yeah.
Yeah. It falls into storm drains and then it's eventually collected by us at this pond. And from the pond, we take it to the water utility block and then we treat it and then pump it up to the overhead tank. Now, 27 acres, 25 million liters, I said. My total requirement is 110 million liters. So what do I do for the rest of it, right? How do I make this place water positive or water neutral at least, right? What we then did is, I have therefore 300,000 liters that are being used by the people in the campus. That wastewater, which goes into the wastewater system, that is a tertiary water treatment plant that we have, treats that and uses it for all your washroom needs and your landscape needs. I knock away these 2 things and your car wash needs.
Okay.
And knock away this, I have therefore taken away 50% of my water demand. From 110, 55 million liters it will become. On the supply side, I gave you 25 million.
Yes.
Then what we have done is, we have used these water efficient fixtures to reduce from say 10 or 12 liters to 5 liters. In this case, we are using it at 4 liters for the faucet.
Okay.
And for the flush tank, we used a dual flush between 3 and 6 liters. That is, the small job is 3 liters, the big job is 6 liters.
Okay.
So what have I done? On the demand side, it dropped dramatically. From that 110 million liters, about 20% came out of simply the efficient fixtures and my digitization of water.
Down.
20%. So 20 million liters got knocked out. I got 25 million liters from this surface water. Now, what do I have next? I have these rooftops of the villas themselves.
Okay.
Each rooftop gives me 1,000 square feet. These are small villas.
1,000 square feet.
1,000 square feet is 100,000 liters.
Okay.
Multiplied by 500 homes, I've got 50 million liters. You got the math again? 1,000 square feet is 1 lakh liters. I have 500 homes with 1,000 square feet.
Got it.
And that is 50 million liters for me. And that I don't have to distribute or, transport. It falls on the roof. I collect it there. I put it into a sump tank and put it back into my overhead tank and use it in my house.
So, whatever is collected on the rooftop, the individual villas is used by the individual villas itself.
Absolutely. I become responsible for the water I need. up to only 100,000 liters. Because, well, the rest of it has to come. So what does one home use in a year? In a year. Per day, if it is 600, if I have 360 days, how much do I need?
360 into 60.
So this math will show you that this 600 into 360 days, how much is that? It will be about 180,000 liters or 200,000 liters. Think 200,000 liters. In this 200,000 liters, 50% is coming out of my recycle, right? What did I do to arrive at this 200,000? I took 600 liters per home, 150 liters per person, or what we say LPCB. The National Building Code is talking of 135 liters.
Yes.
This year, revised National Building Code says it is 90 LPCB. You know what we have done in that? Mr. V. Suresh is the chairman of the National Building Code this year, the last 2 years. Here I have been talking about this is an old acquaintance. And we have got it to a point where the government has accepted that 135 will become 90 LPCB. If this is 90 LPCB, right? You know what can happen if in my case here of that development that I'm talking about, the LPCB requirement is after all the reuse, 30 LPCB.
From
Yes,
90 to
no, from 135
135, got it.
to 30 that is after the reuse and this net zero water loop, the additional water my house needs is only 30 liters, which I will get from either the borewell or from my storage systems. That is 3 types of storage. I mean, one is of course your overhead tanks and blah.
Correct. Yes.
The second is my surface water harvest,
Yes.
which is linked to the storage. Now, this apart from the surface water, I get the roof water, which is easier to clean because roof water is not as muddy and
Yes.
turbidity levels are much lower. After which I have open wells. Every well gives me, after the first 2 years,
There are open wells as well there.
yeah, put them in. For every acre approximately, I have about 4 wells, open wells. You know, I created one in 2004, about 21 years ago, in Whitefield. It's called ZED Homes.
Okay.
Z standing for Zero Energy Development.
Okay.
I was the first one to use Z at that point of time. There was another guy in Piccadilly, very close to some place in London, South London, who had used the same Z. You know, Bed Z it was called. It was in Beddington, a place called Beddington. And I've gone and seen it also later, much later.
Okay.
And I told that guy, look, we both seem to have invented the wheel, you know, in the sense that he used Z, I used Z, and then we created many Z homes here as apartments go when I was a builder. The point is this, that apartment created in 2004, 5 and 6, I think we handed over, you know, possession and all that was given to them in 2008 and they resisted the idea. They said, well, you're giving me without water supply board. I said, look, your water supply board will never give you water. They didn't believe it. I had a very stormy meeting with about 30, 40 of these blessed fellows who had bought those homes, who said, sir, we don't care. You have to give us a water supply board connection. And you know what I did? I gave them an undertaking in writing. You know, they got it checked with their lawyers. And I said, in the next 2 years, if I'm not able to supply you water, I will then pay that money as deposit to water supply board and get that line if necessary. And they accepted at that point.
Okay.
Interestingly, Nolan, you began somewhere saying something about civilizations.
Water is the essence of life and civilizations die if there's no water.
Absolutely. You take any of these 7, 8 civilizations, the Incan, Mayan, Egyptian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian, of course the Indus Valley, all of them died in less than 60, 70 years, although they were at least 2,000 years old as a civilization. And why did they die? All to do with water. So you know, and when you talk economies, when, you know, if you go north of Chennai, and you spill into Andhra, you find something called Sri City. Why would Sri City be located where it is? Because there is water. Every single industrial estate born in the 1970s, 80s, were set up in places where there was an abundance of water. And what did they do to the place? They abused, they depleted, they degraded the system, so much so that they all become deserts. Now, if you are an urban planner, how do you look at water capacity before you decide to create another township or extend a city? Today, this state government is talking of 7 more satellite towns that will come up.
Yes.
That was one of the first announcements that we made when this government took over.
I was wondering if they get all that water because we struggle to bring water.
In
to
one of the
city.
meetings I had with some officers of the government, I told them, look, if you want to create anything like this, not a problem. But first understand the capacity, the water-bearing capacity of that region before you do it. For example, if I want to do something in the region of Hoskote or Devanhalli or even Dabbalapur, you must remember all of these talukas were declared drought-prone in 1967, not today. And 60 years later, you want to go and develop more things in those parts.
So where do they plan to bring water from?
Of course, they will now talk about long-distance, river projects from Ethinahole to, Hoganekal and such.
But under the SDG, we're not supposed to go beyond, 30 kilometers?
Who cares? Who is talking about SDGs? This is the disconnect. COP to something else that somebody else will talk about at these climate conventions is got nothing to do with what you will continue to do as politicians or as ministers. Right? What will administrators do? Can I blame administrators? They will do what the bidding is from the regime that is governing at that point of time. They're not even governing. These things like they are rulers. They serve like kings and not as and treat you as subjects. There is not you talk about PPP. Where is the public in it? Where are the people in it? Right? It's all declared, decided, the DPRs are made without consultation with the public, with people, right? So how do you stop this? I really don't know. See, with greater awareness, to go back to your question, with greater awareness of what is happening to your city, of how a lot of, your requirements on energy or on water can be met by your own system without dependence on the government. If you reach a point when you say that I do not want you, Mr. BWSSB, or whatever the Jal Nigam is in whichever city, they'll fox. They don't know what to do with you. In 2006, we had to get an NOC for that particular apartment. I said, I don't need the NOC. The BWSSB fellow was fox. He didn't know what to do with this because he thought he can, get his share of the money, some speed money and such. It's the done thing, right? That you will get a connection from the BWSSB. I said, I don't want it. 2 years later, these guys are coming back and saying, like, how are you? I said, look, if I'm not going to take a connection, what is your challenge? Now, if you continue, and that was for me an example. I was setting examples in whatever I did. I mean, I was never a major builder. I did no more than about 2.5 million square feet. And at one point in time in 2016, I got tired of it. I knew I was a Himalayan failure because I was not bringing change. Like I said at some point in time to you, I didn't want to be a journalist after 1985 so because I wanted to see that I could not just report change, but be that change.
Okay.
And I couldn't be. To me, after 42 years of doing such things, I know that I have not been able to, with those inspired, isolated examples that I created, bring that change among people. My whole idea was that if I create one such model, there'll be people who will want to emulate that. Did not happen. This Armageddon of whatever development that we are talking about as governments and people is so sad. And when I go to colleges and I'm listening to people who are 20, 18, 21, and they tell me that they want to join conglomerates and multinational corporations, I don't know what to do with them. None of them are vested with the significance of some value that they can bring to India. How do you enlarge the green footprint of India? How do you go back and learn from our fathers of people like Gandhi to Kumarappa, to many others who have done such sterling work in this country? I give up. And I know I'm, therefore, a massive failure.
I don't think so, Doctor. I mean, you're talking about rain reach and how you're trying to, personally, rain reach, how you're trying to actually catch them young and the net zero solutions. I mean,
even the Wow Action Forum, for instance, which has brought some 3,000
not
crores.
many people have emulated.
Do you realize that sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
The Wow Action Forum alone, over these 200 plus weeks, about 4 years, every Thursday we have this, this meeting. And you will see nothing less than 40 to 50 people who participate every time, right? What it has done is, it has brought change in people like Ganesh, many others like that. And therefore, that impact we have created, if I were to reckon with all those people who have brought some change on non-fossil water, you called it fossil water to non-fossil, is about 3,000 crore liters that we have done. I think that's impact. Rainreach will reach about 40,000 students, and that is impact. I agree with you that we have made some change, but I continue to think that I'm a failure because these are still isolated, inspiring examples. They are not bringing the change that we want at the larger levels, learning from these inspired examples. That is not happening.
I know I can say, I suppose it takes time, but we don't have time in this country.
We surely don't have the time on the planet. You heard the UN Secretary General talking about it.
Yes.
He gave us 2 years in a report last year. His New Year's message this time was another very dire and grim one. We are not willing to listen. We are not willing to act. We ask how much. When something has to be done of this kind, the first thing that a company manager wants to know is what will it cost? And I'm telling them cost. You will get an IRR that your company cannot make on its business. You will get 25% to 27% on energy or water. Right? They're not willing to listen still. And so it's a cycle. How do I break from this vicious cycle to a virtuous one? How do I make these people understand what this is about? How do I bring outreach of the kind that you are doing now in some extraordinary ways when you talk about, when you say, let's talk about water? It's not just about water, it's about energy too. So you have to say, let's talk about energy too, in a certain sense.
True.
It's people like you, Nolan, and some constant, consistent effort like this from many others that just might bring some change. And who are the biggest offenders? People living in apartments. Anybody who's using more than 100,000 liters. How do I bring them to stop that abuse?
So that's what, in just closing remarks, I just wanted to say the idea about Let's Talk Water is this. I've been a TV reporter for 12 and a half years. I've covered politics a lot. And I see most of the people when you're walking the park or maybe having coffee, you talk about politics. I'm like, politics is there, yes, but do you see any changes taking place? No, but hence the idea of let's talk water. I mean, you're talking about politics, you feel horrible. But let's talk about something where there are chances, you can change things. And that's why let's talk water. And that's the reason we are over here. And slowly, I believe, you and I are having this conversation. I had a conversation with Ganesh, I had a conversation with Mr. Ajit.
TBR.
So, there are people outside who want ideas, who do not know what's to be done. And hence, it's forums like yours and platforms like this, we can sort of educate them.
Of course.
And hope that things change.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I am an undying optimist. I know our cities can become, water neutral and energy neutral too. But the solutions lie today with us. It's not for want of solutions that the impact is not coming about. It's about changing people to make them see that sometimes there are solutions for problems that do not exist in their mind. And that, I think, to me, that's a favorite line of mine. And that has to change. They have to begin to see that there are problems that they do not even know about, and that there are solutions that we can bring for those. And therefore, I continue to be an optimist, Nolan. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation. How do you make people see is part of your mission?
And that's what I'm trying to do. But thank you so much. An eye-opener to so many things, especially the net zero solutions. I just wish that, people understand that I have the money, yes, but I don't have to waste it. Waste it on something which is not infinite. Water is a finite resource. Let's understand that. But thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here.